Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere with your host, Chris Parker.
And welcome back to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere. This is Chris Parker, and I'm having a conversation with Mr. Shaun Smith. And we met back in 2012, and this is going to sound odd, but we were performing together at a sex event in Amsterdam. Now, to be more clear, this was called Sex in the City for customer experience leaders, and it was an event that Shaun was kind enough to come over and be a keynote speaker at. Shaun Smith, founder of Smithco, recently nominated, I think, again for one of the top consultancy awards in the UK. Very, very, privileged to have you here. Can you share with us what is it that you do, and why are you doing what you do?
Okay, Chris. What we do is our promise is to stimulate, advise, and inspire organizations wishing to differentiate around their customer experience. So the stimulate part comes from the books that I've written 5 books on the subject of customer experience. The advisory part is obviously the consultancy services, and we've had the privilege of working with some wonderful brands around the world. And the inspiring part is from speaking. So I've had the opportunity of working all over the world, giving keynotes, and that's how we met. So that's what we do. Why do we do it? Well, why we do it is because when I started my career at the age of 17 years old, I was sitting on a check-in desk at an airport, London Heathrow Airport, and as a customer service agent. And one of the things that I very quickly learned was the difference between good service and bad service and the impact that can have. And so ever since then, I've been passionate about customer experience and trying to give the best possible experience. And so my purpose, really, the purpose of Smithco, is to help our clients do just that.
I love it. And before we press record, we said, let's challenge each other a little bit. So let's have a conversation. I'm curious, you just combined customer service and customer experience. One of the sort of stories or anecdotes that I like to use is Ryanair, which I believe has a appropriate or good customer experience, yet their service, I would argue, is not good. So how do you, in your world, and you've been studying this for years and years and years, how do you combine service with experience?
Well, I use that in a fairly lazy way, because obviously when I first started in this business, customer experience hadn't been conceived. I mean, I think it was Joe Pine was on your show a while ago, and when Joe Pine wrote The Experience Economy, and was it 1998, it was really the first time that we talked about experience. And then my book came out in 2000, which talked about managing the customer experience. So that was really the genesis of the whole notion of what is customer experience. Before then, we'd really thought about it in a much narrower way, which was customer service. And what we meant by that was really the interaction between people, because primarily the way you delivered service was from one person to the customer. And so sitting on a check-in desk, it was less about experience, it was much more about service. But of course, our understanding of the concept has evolved significantly since then across digital, across different channels, and in all these different ways. So thank you for asking that question.
Well, I have had the privilege to have Joe Pine on as well. And so so people who are listening, you can go find the Joe Pine episode about the experience economy and the progression of economic value through experiences. However, you've taken that, I think, further into really customer experience strategy and design. Can you share your, I guess, definition of that for people who maybe aren't in the CX world?
Yeah. So I guess the thing that really sums up our approach to customer experience, and Joe obviously talked about the experience economy, but I think the notion that we brought to the world was the notion of the branded customer experience. And a branded customer experience is an experience which is one which becomes synonymous with you as an organization. You become famous for it because of the nature of that experience. It's so distinctive. And there are 4 characteristics of a branded customer experience. The first is consistency. So a fundamental thing about any brand is predictability. The original notion of branding was literally putting a stamp on a product or a stamp on an animal so you can recognize it as you know it's yours. So consistency and predictability is really important. The second is intentionality. Great experiences are those where you get the impression that the organization has intended for you to have it. They've designed it. They've thought about it. You made the distinction just now, Chris, about the difference between service and experience. And, we've always had examples of great service. That individual assistant in the shoe shop that's just a lovely person that gives you great service. It's not an experience because it's resident in that individual. It's just a lovely person. It's not anything to do with the organization. Whereas an experience has to be consistent and it has to be designed, and that's intentionality. The third is around differentiation. So it needs to be different in a meaningful way from your competitors. And the fourth thing is value. That difference needs to represent value to your competitor, to your customers, because there are some of your listeners may remember a brand that started some years ago called the Fashion Cafe. So if we think about the Hard Rock Cafe, we think about a cafe experience built around music. If we think about Planet Hollywood, we think of a cafe experience, a restaurant experience built around the movie industry. Well, the Fashion Cafe was started by Naomi Campbell and Elle Macpherson, and it was an experience built around the fashion world. So there was wonderful icons and photographs of models and fashion and great music and great movies and all of that around. But the fundamental experience was awful. The service was terrible in the traditional sense. The food wasn't great. It was just a gimmick. And so people would go once for the entertainment and wouldn't go again. And it quickly went out of business. So the point being that it was, yes, consistent, it was intentional, it was different, but it wasn't valuable. And so it has to be those four things.
I imagine if you're sort of trying to be a Me Too or a copycat, the Fashion Cafe, and I remember that because for me, Hard Rock Cafe is everything about the hamburgers and the chicken wings. And I don't know if those things are really synonymous with fashion. So I think if we look at sustainable value through this branded experience, and you mentioned Planet Hollywood, which is, I'm originally from Los Angeles, so we had a couple of Planet Hollywoods around, but I think there's only a few left. The only one that I know of, I think, is next to Disneyland Paris. There might be one or two around, but that was not sustainable for them. So,
and I think that's the issue that if you come up with a concept which it may have some short-term sort of novelty value because it is different, but unless it fundamentally creates sustainable value for your customers, then it's not likely to be a long-term proposition. And so a branded customer experience has to meet those four characteristics, and also it needs to evolve. So as customers' expectations change, as their tastes change, as their needs change, then the organization needs to evolve with it and keep abreast of those changes so that it continually provides the value that those customers are seeking. And the bar is continually raising. As we know that satisfaction is expectation divided by experience. And whenever we are as a consumer, we are always thinking about what do I expect and what do I experience? And if the experience is greater than the expectation, then we're happy. And we have a survey called the Customer Experience Management Survey, which we use with organizations, and we measure both of those things. We first of all measure what do the customers expect, and then what do they experience based on those expectations, and basically the analysis is a function of those two things. And that's constantly evolving. And for many organizations, the trouble is that they get stuck around what they believe the customers expect, or a standard that they aspire to, which rapidly goes out of date.
It rapidly goes out of date, and the term that's coming to my mind is sort of the Red Queen effect. From the Alice in Wonderland, that the faster and faster you run, the you just stay in the same place. What have you seen, or how can you break that cycle? Because if you're just trying to do more and more and more, is that a time to pivot and maybe be bold in a different direction, or or because at a certain point, yeah, you're giving me another type of flavor of popcorn at the cinema, but still it's the cinema, and so I don't need it. It's like I'm going to go to Netflix, and the cinema's gone. So
yeah, I think you're right, Chris. Yeah, it is about pivoting and then when to do something different. As you know, I wrote a book some years ago called Bold: How to Be Brave in Business and Win. And it was really about looking at those organizations that do things differently, not the same. We often say that we believe that best practice is bad practice, because best practice implies that there's one way of doing things and that everybody should follow suit. But the problem is that there is only one Disney. There is only one Ritz-Carlton. So if you simply follow suit, if you simply try and follow the leader, you're going to be running harder and faster, trying to catch up, and you never quite make it. Mm. So doing things differently, it's about pivoting and going off in a different dimension, a different direction, and actually disrupting in that way. And if you look at some of the most interesting brands, those have been the ones that have done just that. They've been bold, they've gone off in a different direction. And change the market, change the paradigm.
I do want to jump in, and I think you've already answered it maybe completely, but I want to give a shout out to Wim Luberson. And Wim is a friend who owns a bed and breakfast in South Africa, happens to be a consultant. And because, international travel is kind of low these days, he's been kindly helping me craft one of our methods, the Simplicity Sprint. And he literally just 2 days ago suggested that we use one book. He only gave me one option to inspire people to think differently. And it was this book, which I'm holding up on the video, Bold, How to Be Brave in Business and Win, which is one of my treasured books because it's signed by you from 2012. Thank you. And Vim's question was, this was in 2012. Looking back, how have you seen these businesses sustain their performance or pivot, or is there any, specific stories of anecdotes that, if only we knew then what we knew now, then maybe some of these brands would have been reflected differently?
Let me think about this week. And in fact, we have two news stories this week that I've been reading, which actually directly refer to brands that we wrote about, of the brands in the book. So one of them was Virgin Galactic. So when we wrote that book in 2012, we did a chapter about Virgin, and specifically Virgin Galactic, and how Virgin Galactic was sort of taking on NASA. It was disrupting the space industry. And of course, now we've got SpaceX and Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos doing the same thing. But back then, Virgin Galactic was the first. It was the first sort of private space venture. And they were due to get the first passengers into space by, I think, 2013, I think it was. And the announcement was made this week that they're finally doing it this year. So what's the point of the story? You would say, well, that was a real failure then. Well, actually, no. When you think about the vision that they've had, if you think about some of the challenges that they had, which is one of their spaceships blew up and unfortunately the pilot was killed, and they had to go back to the drawing board and re-engineer it and start again, which they've done. And they this week announced that in fact they just had their first flights, and they will be due to be taking passengers up this year. And I guess the issue with that is the vision and the doggedness of some of these brands, that Branson hasn't given up. He didn't give up when they had the tragedy. He didn't give up when money was draining out of the system. He's kept at it. And the interesting thing is I think they've got something like, I can't remember how many thousand people who have paid to be the passengers on the wait list. And these group of people have, over the last 10 years, since 2012, have been passionate advocates for Virgin Galactic. They meet annually, they do things together, they become friends. There's a strong community of these Virgin Galactic passengers, because what Branson has very cleverly done is created a whole experience around that brand. So that's one story which I think is interesting, but it's about being bold is sometimes being dogged as well. It's not giving up, because being bold is difficult. I guess the second brand is Burberry. So this week, it was announced in the UK press that Burberry was giving back, I think it was £300 million of funding from the government that they got because of COVID. So as I'm sure many of your listeners will be aware, that government provides support and funding for large organizations because of all the disruption to the economy. Well, Burberry have given 300 million back because they've done so well coming through the last year. They initially struggled like everybody else because obviously the high street retail was hit, but they very quickly pivoted online. And because of the strength of the brand, because of the strength of the experience, because of their purpose, they've been incredibly successful, and their sales have gone through the roof, and they've had a brilliant year. Interestingly enough, Burberry's purpose is what they call democratic luxury. So what they mean by that is, if we think of most luxury brands, we walk down Champs-Élysées or Fifth Avenue or Bond Street or whatever, our first experience of most luxury brands is, a rather severe looking, usually man, standing outside in black with a shaven head and a radio in the ear, and they're called loss adjusters. These are security people who are basically stop people shoplifting. And that's our first experience, and usually the doors are closed. So it's all a bit intimidating and not welcoming. And we had the great privilege of working with Burberry some years ago on their experience. And because of their purpose of democratic luxuries, they want to be inclusive and welcoming, not aloof. We had the opportunity of working on the experience, and one of the insights was that all these luxury brands have these loss adjusters, these security people, and so part of the design that we did was to say, why don't you have greeters rather than loss adjusters? And so they got rid of, I think it was G4S or Securico or whoever it was that they outsourced to, and employed their own people and said, your first job is to be welcoming, your first job is to be inclusive, and your second job is to manage security. And that was one of the things that they did. But I think Burberry's real ability has been to pivot. So one of the things they did, for example, during the COVID crisis, was to pivot their factory in a place called Castleford to make masks. So you've got these really cool check masks, the Burberry check that they were making for COVID. So a couple of examples from the book.
What it sounds like is these examples, and again, I took the notes down, consistency, intentionality, differentiated, value-based. And the fifth you mentioned, which was evolution, so to constantly evolve. And so in both of these cases, neither of them were bold and then just sort of, that was the wind behind their sails for 10 years. No, they had to be, really, on target, on purpose, which is going to, I think, lead us into the next question, to contribute to their success. And On Purpose is your fifth book, published 2015, is according to my research on Amazon. And it's about On Purpose, delivering a branded customer experience that people love. So what I'm curious about is, after 4 books, this seemed to be so important that it warranted, the multi-year effort to publish. What was the drive behind, making this happen?
Well, that's a great question, Chris. When we wrote Bold, we wrote about, I think it was 12 brands, people like Apple and so on, Burberry and the others that I've mentioned. And I had the opportunity of interviewing the chief executives, the chief marketing officers, the HR directors, and so on from these organizations. And we also, on the back of those interviews, conceived a model, which we called Bold, and it had 8 dimensions to this model with a number of questions. And we also did a quantitative survey, and we were able to measure the bold companies versus the average based on the survey. And a number of things came out as being really important and characteristic of these brands. But one of them that came out really above all others was the sense of purpose, a very strong sense of why they exist, the difference they wanted to make. And they came out so strongly that we felt that that was deserving of a book on its own. So that led to On Purpose, because of all these brands that we studied and all the chief executives we spoke to, what came through so clearly was their sense of purpose. And it wasn't about making money. It really wasn't about making money. The story of, I was on stage in New York many years ago, giving a speech talking about great brands, and I talked about Amazon. And one of the other panelists was quite rude. He, during this panel, said to me, "Shaun, you talked about Amazon as being a great brand. How can that be? They don't make any money." And I said, well, they've got incredible brand recognition. They've got a fantastic reputation, even then, for giving a fabulous experience for customers. They're disrupting retail. So for me, that's got all the characteristics of a great brand, consistency, intentionality, differentiation, and value. And he said, they don't make any money. And I said, well, they will. Trust me, they will. Because right now, what Jeff Bezos is choosing to do is to build brand strength, build his customer base, and build ubiquity. And at some point, he's going to turn the tap, and that will flow into profits. And of course, where we are today is Amazon is the most profitable company in the world, and Jeff Bezos is the wealthiest man. And the point about that is if you look at Amazon's purpose, its purpose is to be the Earth's most customer-centric company. That's its purpose. And Jeff Bezos told me that, when we wrote the book many years ago. And it has always been so. But if you look at how Amazon has evolved, so it started out selling books, and then, of course, it branched out into many other products. And, of course, now a big part of Amazon's revenues come from its supply chain, its logistics expertise. And, of course, now he's going into space and all the rest of it. But the point about it is that they've never let go of that purpose, the Earth's most customer-centric company. And all of the innovation has stemmed from that sense of purpose that drives them. I mean, if you look at some of the things they're doing now, delivery slots in an hour, who knew that we needed that? I mean, can remember the days, Chris, when you'd order something online or whatever, and they'd say, okay, it'll be delivered next week. And you say, well, when next week? And they'd say, well, we don't know. It's sometime next week. And you'd have to say, well, do I stay in? And then it came down to, well, okay, we can deliver next Tuesday. Well, when next Tuesday? Well, we don't know. Well, Amazon, incredible. We have become so used to ordering something and getting it next morning. And of course, now they're getting it down to having drone deliveries, and you'll be able to choose your 1 hour slot. It's incredible.
It's
all down to that purpose.
It's absolutely incredible. And also, there's the dimension of experimentation with Amazon, because some of the things that they've tried that haven't really worked, like the dash button and other things that I could imagine would have been super, super cool, but then, I don't know the backstory, but it seemed to not have paid off. And so then they didn't stick with that. They continued to evolve. So, Shaun, I'm maybe a little plug for what I'm working on is with the simplicity scan. And that is, the little artifact that I, promote on the website, ebullient.com. That's 4 domains. There's focus, prepare, deliver, and then there's the actual momentum. So it's really a holistic sort of business design tool. The top left is purpose. And what I find is people either get it or they don't. And what I'd like to do is loop back to smithco, which is now emerged with caffeine. And for those organizations that are seeking to be more purpose-driven, how would you recommend they do that? And perhaps how can Smith & Co. help them find their purpose or be more purposeful? Because either it's there and they do that sort of inherently, or it needs some teasing out and it needs to be made more explicit. So what's the journey to purpose that you recommend?
It's going to seem like a strange thing to say, but my number one recommendation is don't use an agency.
Okay.
Now, let me qualify that in what I say. When we wrote On Purpose, there's a lot of people talking about purpose now. It's become, it's become a hot topic. But when we first wrote On Purpose, it was still pretty much in its infancy as a notion. And a lot of people read the book and said, "Oh, this is great." And there was sort of a flurry of requests to various ad agencies and brand agencies. "Oh, we need a purpose. Can you help us write a purpose?" And of course, that defeats the objective, because it's not about having a purpose. It's about doing a purpose. It's behaving on purpose. And if you look at the strong brands, the brand that really do this wonderfully well, is because of that strong belief in what they do that drives everything in the organization, that drives all of their behavior. And therefore, it has to come from the leadership. So when we work with organizations, we're very careful to facilitate a process with the leadership team and the broader leadership team, doing some research, doing facilitation, doing discussions, to help them arrive at their purpose, so that it's owned by them and communicated by them, and that's essentially it. And the worst thing of all is to go into a dark room and have your agency come up with some fine words and suddenly announce them. I mean, a good example of that was BP. If you remember some years ago, British Petroleum. Remember, it used to have the sort of uppercase BP in the blue, and it was British Petroleum. And they did some research and they identified a gap in the market for an environmentally friendly energy company. And they softened the BP to green and the yellow with almost like the floor design, and they changed all their forecourts, and it became Beyond Petroleum, and it was all very soft and fluffy. And of course, when push came to the shove, in the Gulf of Mexico with Deepwater Horizon, and they had the opportunity of fitting equipment that would have prevented the oil spill. For financial reasons, they decided not to, and the rest we know. It cost them billions in reparations and damages, and almost busted the company. So there was an example of an organization that was pretending to do one thing but acting in a different way. So it's not about, and VW is another example. So it's not about the having of a purpose, it's about the doing, it's the behaving on purpose. And so we start with really looking at three lenses. We look at the customer lens. So what is it that customers perceive about you? What is it that they expect? The employee lens. What do they believe? What do they expect? And the societal lens. So what does society expect? And what does it perceive as being important? And by looking at those three lenses and really looking at it through the heritage of the company, what are the true stories of this company? What's the real heritage of this organization? You almost end up in a sweet spot where there are some truths, some truths about this organization that you can tell that are just as relevant for customers and relevant for employees and relevant for society. So to give an example of that, we have the privilege of working with a company called TIAA, which is the largest pension provider in the States. And one of its brands is called Nuveen, and Nuveen provides financial products and so on for pension organizers and so on. And if you look at Nuveen, it's started by John Nuveen about over 100 years ago. And its heritage was about making an enduring impact. That was sort of the basis for the brand, helping to building infrastructure to create an enduring impact. And its purpose is creating an enduring impact on the world. And we help to sort of facilitate that purpose. And it was very interesting because we went through this process just about a year ago, working with the leadership team, doing research, coming up with this purpose. And it was felt that it was equally appropriate for employees, for customers, for society, because of ESG, environmental, socially responsive funds and the rest of it. And the interesting thing was that having just done that piece of work, of course, the pandemic hit, And the client was able to tell us that it was just incredible because of having gone through that process of reconfirming their purpose, of communicating to all of their people. They were able to pivot very quickly to help their customers during that process, because everybody was completely aligned with what they were trying to achieve. Everybody was focused on, if you will, that higher purpose, and therefore they were much more empowered. So purpose is very, very powerful. And I think I think what we're doing is we're actually, I think, going through, because of COVID, we're going into a new era. I think we're going to see a focus on a new era, a shift away from corporate greed, away from pure profitability, from shareholder value. And we're going to see a shift towards humanity, towards, I think, morality, to a focus on customers and focus on society. And I'm not a tree-hugging person, so I'm not a soft, fluffy person, as you know, Chris. But I actually believe that we're going to see this shift from this self-serving behavior that we saw during the financial crisis to a new era, which is really going to be focusing on people and society.
Now, Shaun, I have to ask then, with that change coming, and I feel it too, how could you possibly consider retiring in the next couple of years? There's going to be such an amazing amount of work and value and joy created. How could you possibly consider not writing the sixth book, or are you really confident, that the consultancy is in good hands and they will help customers and businesses in the future?
My co-author, Andy Mulligan, who's a dear friend and a long-standing colleague, we've written 5 books together, and over the last 20 years. And so, and he's managing partner of smithco now, so absolutely it's in good hands. Absolutely it is. But also I think the great thing, I'm kind of semi-retired, Chris, which is why I'm talking to you today. Is what that means is I get to work with the customers and the clients and the people I really enjoy working with. And I have a very good excuse for saying no to those that I don't.
Yeah, beautiful. I couldn't imagine that you're going to go off and golf, indefinitely forever. So that, and if people are listening and would like to benefit from your insights, maybe coaching executives or maybe introducing Smith & Co. to run some programs, how would they get involved, and what would that experience look like? Maybe what is the experience of experiencing Smith & Co. and helping them transform their perspective on customer experience?
Well, today, we were very fortunate. We heard that for the second year running, we've won the Financial Times award for one of UK's leading consultancies. And we're very small. I mean, we are a tiny, tiny organization compared to some of the other winners. And I think the reason for that, Chris, is because when I started this business 20 years ago, my partner and I decided to start a brand and not a company. We said, we don't have any aspirations to have lots of overhead and fine offices and all of that. But what we would love to do is to start a brand that makes a difference, that is known for something, is famous for something, and it helps people, helps organizations make a difference themselves, and it's fun to work with. So we kind of started out, and we've been a virtual organization ever since. So we still don't have offices, and we get to work with some of the largest organizations in the world. As I say, TIAA, Burberry, Intercontinental Hotels Group, PayPal. We've worked with some fine organizations, and we've done it because we've got a team of super people who are passionate about it, and we have the opportunity of pivoting and leveraging, because if we work with a Burberry, that requires a very different skill set from working with the Intercontinental Hotels or an HSBC. So we're able to select the team to work with the client. What that means is we're much more intentional about the experience we create for our clients, and we try and make it simple and fun. Because I think consultancies are way too serious sometimes. But they'll try making it simple without being simplistic, but also fun. We hope we make a difference, and that seems to have worked for us so far.
Yeah, simple without simplistic is That's always a challenge. How do you make something simple but not too simple? So, Shaun Smith, thank you so much for joining. In the show notes, we'll have a link to your LinkedIn profile, and they can also find you at smithconsultancy.com.
Smithco Consultancy, yeah.
Smithco Consultancy, my apologies. There's a Coco in the middle there. Smithcoconsultancy.com. Thank you for correcting. And I would, and I'll also put the at least the links to the on purpose and the bold books, because those are the ones we've spoken about. But I would really recommend these books, because the way they're written is, to basically use your attributes of stimulating, having practical advice and inspiring. They're very, I guess, approachable and, profound in the insights that you can take, for all the different cases. So bold and on purpose, I would definitely recommend both those, as well as your other books. So Shaun Smith, thank you so much for joining. I have really appreciated this.
My pleasure. Thanks so much indeed. And by the way, there was a white paper that we wrote recently. I'll give you the link to that, Chris, and please make that available to your listeners if you wish. And that may be useful, because it touches on a number of things that we talked about today.
Love it. I will definitely include that link in the show notes. Thank you, Shaun.
Okay. Thanks then. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. Like and subscribe to the podcast on your favorite player, and download the Simplicity Kit from ebullient.com.